Okay, I guess we'll get started here. Hi. Thanks for coming to our talk, Structured Content and Flexible Layouts, a case study for Georgia.gov. We'll do a couple of intros here real quick. My name is Greg Dunlap. I'm the Director of Strategy here at Lullabot. I've been with the company for about 8.5 years, and I've been involved in the Drupal scene for about 15 years, and I live in Monterey, California.
Hi all, I'm Marissa Epstein. So I'm a senior user experience strategist also at Lullabot. I've been there for about 7 years, and I get to help Georgia with this project. I'm located in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm CPA-CC certified for accessibility.
Hi, I'm Rachel Hurt. I am the UX UI designer at Digital Service Georgia. I do actually live in Indianapolis, but I've been with the team for about 6 years.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about this project and provide a little context for what we'll be discussing here today. So about 10 years ago, Digital Services Georgia, which is the agency at Georgia that's responsible for their web presences, recognized that creating a more consistent experience was a priority if they wanted to have an accessible and constituent-centric web presence. And so they created a Drupal 7 platform for managing the websites of government agencies. And this provided them with a common tool set for managing their content, which would in turn help provide the consistency that the digital services team was looking for. Now, Georgia has around 120 agencies. And despite the fact that there's no mandate to join this new platform, a little over 2/3 of the people of the agencies did end up migrating their websites in. But what didn't change was the governance model for this content. The authors at those agencies are subject matter experts who know their content and constituent needs very well. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a lot of process getting in their way of them entering and creating their own content. However, the wide variation in web and content skills across those agencies made it really difficult to enforce content guidelines and standards. And even the few guardrails they did put in were really controversial. And since agencies could jump ship and just launch a WordPress site whenever they wanted, it put digital services in a really tough spot because they knew that even if constituent experience wasn't perfect in this system, if the agencies left, it would get worse. As one of our stakeholders for this project said, all we have is carrots. We don't have any sticks. All we can do is entice people into the system, but we don't have any way to make them, you know, to make them work within the content guidelines that we've provided. So obviously there's a few problems to solve here, but one of the biggest ones and the one we're focusing on today is how to manage content authoring in this new system. So there were kind of three problems that were kind of brought together and competing in here. First is that the agency authors have a need to create a wide variety of content to meet their needs, and their needs are very varied. So for instance, some strides have been made on landing pages, which allowed flexible assembling of blocks and link groups. However, these were tightly controlled and the authors weren't empowered to change them directly. Updates had to be passed through the digital services team's ticketing system. At the same time, the main content pages had very few options available other than basic formatting and imagery. And all of this left authors not very pleased. Secondly, the digital services team wanted consistency and predictability. There were just too many ways to do the same thing across agencies. And even with a central system, it was causing a lot of dissonance for constituents as they moved from agency to agency. A new common design system was going to help this out, but there needed to be some common content patterns created to serve common use cases. And then, of course, the constituents just want clear and findable content. They've got tasks to do, they've got information they need, and they want to get to it. So then we set off on a process of figuring out how are we going to do this? And I'm going to pass this on to Marissa to talk about how that worked.
Thank you so much, Greg. Yeah, so I'll jump right into this solving of the problem that Greg's teed up. So the process that follows was over roughly 4 months of research and content strategy, and I broke it down into 3 phases. First things first, the big phase, we start with research to understand the problem from all the perspectives involved. There were different kinds of people experiencing the pains that Greg described in different ways. So we did conduct research with Georgia residents, but today I wanted to focus on internal author research within state agencies. Our first interaction with agency authors were contextual interviews with them, and this was pretty fun. So this allowed us to absorb so much information about the current editorial experience and what could be better. We learned about authors' goals and what complicates those goals, and this gave us a sense of their comfort levels as well with the website's content structure and technology in general. So I just want to add the detail here. We say contextual in that we physically went to each person's office and often desk to see where the work really gets done. So over 2 days, we raced around hot Atlanta from one state building to another, gleaning these insights to bring back to our team. I think these quotes capture well some of the interview lessons learned. Some agencies know that their site is inconsistent, or as one put it, went to bed terrible and woke up terrible. We also saw that authors will do a lot of things that they know they aren't supposed to do, such as use tables for layouts. And we dug into this, that content to share and needed different ways to break it up and format it so that it is more digestible. And as a result, their authors would rather keep using something that they found intuitive, such as tables, over new features that might better serve them. Our next step was a heuristic design audit in our research phase. So this audit is an informal, usually solo process of reviewing the website, its current content, structure, design elements, to learn how the components were being used, or design components specifically, and what kinds of responses there were to these current editorial restrictions we've been talking about. And this helps us see what patterns that we might need to build. So I love this slide. Just a few delightful examples we captured from many that we saw within the agency sites, all within the Georgia.gov umbrella. So you can see here author workarounds for these site restrictions, and this contributes to that inconsistent look and feel that Greg noted, but it also presents accessibility issues like incompatibility with screen readers or like low contrast for type. All of this results in those types of situations that the restrictions were initially put in place to avoid, but it did give us a lot of inspiration for things like button options and other layouts to build for authors. So to recap our research phase, we knew that we needed to make content creation more intuitive and user-friendly, or else pieces would not be used. We knew that the templates needed to provide customization to meet a diverse set of agency needs. And we knew that if we didn't find a way, that the authors would. So they proverbially use any tool as a hammer when they saw a nail. So to this end, we wanted to provide best practices and celebrate real examples. We thought this could be one of the carrots in our tool belt. So now we were equipped to share our informed recommendations with the team and get refining. This initial research culminated into our initial hypotheses. We presented these to the team during an in-person workshop, and from there refined future strategy recommendations. So I'll give you a shorter pitch with some highlights from that workshop. So as you may know, each content type in Drupal can be displayed in a variety of ways called display modes. For instance, teaser and full page are default display modes for content in Drupal, and it's the same content displayed in 2 different ways. So we started talking about ways we could leverage custom display modes to create pages that are more or less assemblies of different pieces of content displayed differently. This eventually made its way into these 2 broad concepts you can see, this topic and landing page. Landing pages are just an aggregation of content from throughout the site, displayed in different blocks, and topic pages are more of a standard long-form text page, but with the content embedded into the text in different ways, as you can see in the green there. We thought these concepts provided an enormous amount of flexibility for authors and the potential for a lot of content reuse. So key to both of these solutions is what goes in those green X's. This is something we've been calling micro-content. So these are small pieces of structured content that can be embedded or placed contextually in different use cases throughout the site. The main way that micro-content is different than normal content is that it does not live at its own URL. Its only purpose is to either provide some context in place or lead users to another area of the site. For Georgia, we included micro-content types like link collections, calls to actions, and icon lists that you can see here, among others. Also, micro-content has a couple of properties that make it particularly useful. It is structured, so it has fields specific to its use case. And this structure makes micro-content predictable in terms of how it will be rendered to the user. So you can see here a small tile set micro-content type. There's a title at the top, then a series of links with an icon or an image, and below that a URL for further information. Since we know exactly what these options are from the fields, it's easy to say, okay, here's how we're going to render this in 2-column or 3-column or with multiple icons using the rules that we've set for ourselves. Another great feature of micro-content is that it's reusable. So you can make a promo like this or link collection once and use it in multiple pages or places throughout your site. Then when you need to update a link, you can do it once. It's a huge help for keeping the pages maintained over time. So that's a theory, but we needed to find out if authors actually understood and they would want to use it. So next we needed their buy-in. We validated our hypothesis through testing, but when I say testing here, this is not in the sense of comprehensive site usability, that was separate. This phase focused on analyzing our ideas carefully to validate what worked and iterate upon what did not. I'll scope this again to just a few examples of what brought the highest impact specifically for providing those flexible layouts. So this was another really fun step, this first one, paper prototyping. So this is a great way to engage participants in a low fidelity workshop. This was in person, but you can do this remotely. One goal was validating the landing page building concept that we just described. So will the agency authors be happier with the drag and drop workflow? Does this create all the flexibility they need? Or does it introduce another problem? And secondarily, we wanted to test it against real content. So the question here is, would all existing content and content that they desired flourish or flounder under the framework? So a couple pictures of an example from a validation workshop with the Environmental Protection Division. We brought printouts on the left of their agency pages, specific examples that were key to them. Next is an 11 by 17. It's just a piece of paper that was laminated so that we could draw on it with dry erase markers. And on the right, you can see this, just a couple of this large set of flashcard components that we had for the types of reusable modules that would appear on the site. So from here, we selected the cards together and ordered them on the large sheet, trying to make their organization landing page, and then drew in any custom details. And this process allowed us to start with proposed components and then see what our variations were, like if they might need to be presented in different ways or if something was missing. And it also allowed us to see over time which components were more important to different agencies and if there was overlap. So here you can see an example of what their finished homepage looks like, and it's already got pretty close. Okay, I'll move on to the other validation process. This focused on actually what we named the content type. So landing page was just one of the different content types we created for the new site. There were some that we consolidated. There were some that we added, like micro content. And we knew that this was sort of our initial barrier potentially and wanted to make sure that authors understood what they were and if they would actually use them. So yeah, we're hoping to entice the authors to use the content types that are better suited to a specific need in this case, rather than, again, relying on what's familiar. The first step here was a survey online, and then we dug into these topics with authors in person, interviewing alongside the workshops. We essentially wanted to see, could they identify correctly what would be the best content type within the creation process and then refine anything confusing from there. So we did an initial gut check of the model of different content types and then reviewed a create new content page options. And finally, as we did with mapping the landing page to our page builder activity, we now ask them to map a couple important high traffic content pages to what types they would use in the future and about any pages that they wish that they had. So to recap here, overall, we saw a positive response to the content model, as well as the layout builder functionality and the components that we presented to the agency staff. Yay. So I love this quote, everything was a step in the right direction. It looks great, a lot of options, a lot of flexibility, and ultimately everything that could be produced for that agency could be reproduced. So that was a success as well. Yeah, so we're going to give you a deeper dive at the end, but let's get a little quick view of the changes and more from Rachel.
Awesome. So this is the sort of before and after. This is the same homepage for Department of Revenue on the left in the old system as it is on the right in the new system that we call GovHub. And so obviously there is an updated style here, but we also just have a lot more going for us in the new system in terms of flexibility and what can be done with the content. And then this also gives us a lot of benefit on the internal pages, which are more content heavy. So previously we just had a vertical flow of fully unique content. You could put images in, whatever, but it all just lives in this one place. And now we have micro content and auto teasers that we can embed within the WYSIWYG. And obviously this breaks up the content in new and interesting ways, but it also lets us make use of that reusable structured content that we couldn't really do in this way before. And so our first sites migrated into GovHub in 2019. So I've had a couple of years now to watch and see how it's played out. So what is going well, what's been an issue, and of course, this is an ongoing work in progress. So first off, we have loosened the reins on who can edit landing pages and given editors more control over that. So like Greg said earlier, landing pages in the old system were pretty locked down. Editors could change out the text or the links, but anything bigger, like adding a new block or rearranging the layout, had to come through my team at Digital Services. And now most editors do have access to edit both the content and the layout for these landing pages. And that's something that they're really taking advantage of and that we've gotten a lot of positive responses to. Second, this does allow for quick updates. And this is, of course, important for quick and timely information, just getting onto the website without having to go through our team. And we've seen this especially come into play over the past year and a half with all of the COVID-19 information that every agency is putting on their homepage and creating full COVID-19 pages to explain how their organization is responding to the pandemic and what people need to know. And so they've been able to get this information up and live without needing to wait on us to make any changes for them. And so the end result might not be perfect. There's definitely some things that would change in the ideal world, but that's something that we can always take care of later. The important thing right now is that the content is out and available for the public. And this also opens up our ability to have easy back and forth collaboration with our clients. So for example, earlier this year, we partnered with the Georgia Department of Driver Services on a homepage refresh. And the primary content manager over there, she spends a lot of time already looking at the data and understanding how users are accessing their information and what they're paying attention to. She also has a good idea of what her stakeholders are going to respond well to. And so with the ability to fully create and edit these landing pages, she could come to us with this version of the page in draft mode and show us exactly what she's thinking. And so then from there, we can respond with, like, this is a great start. Here are some thoughts. Maybe this is what can change. And ultimately, we just have this really great back and forth until we land on the final version that we ended up going live with. And so throughout this project, just everyone having full access into the system to make these changes and work with live content was a really helpful benefit for this live collaboration. So next, I'm going to talk about content sharing, and Greg and Marissa have already given a really great intro into this concept. So let's take a look at how this has gone. So first off, having the single source of truth has been a really great benefit. Having the ability to use one piece of content in multiple places, and editors are able to update or remove that content in bulk has been a really great advantage. So for example, every website on GovHub has a primary contact. And so that information is going to show up on the contact detail page. It can optionally also show up in the footer for the website as a whole. It'll also show up on the About Us page. They can choose to embed it within a WYSIWYG. They can place a block on a landing page. And then for this primary contact for every website, we have it automatically sharing to the Georgia.gov organization page. And then this will also show up on any services on Georgia.gov that are associated with that org. And so for all these different placements, if a phone number changes, or maybe there's a new person in this role, the editor needs to only go into one single place and make that update here. And then that change will take place across all of the different locations. And we are continuing to update the system and update particular content types to encourage editors to reuse their content. And this is just recognizing that this is new and not necessarily intuitive for someone who's used to working in a different way. And so, for example, with contacts again, we've already talked about how that's really great for reuse in all these different places. But a lot of times editors are just typing the information directly into the body WYSIWYG on the page. And for them, this is just an easy way to get that information on the page and available. They don't have to think through reusing the content or making multiple pieces and grouping them together. But we do actually have a micro content type called contact directory, and that takes existing contact nodes and organizes them into a single block. And so this is one place where we are taking another look at the editor experience for building those directories. We're trying to figure out how to ease that burden and make it more intuitive and simple for the editors at the forefront when they're putting together that reusable structured content. And this also does introduce some problems. So editors tend to think of their website in terms of pages and not necessarily chunks of content. And so they might forget or might not totally understand that editing the micro content in one place will edit that content everywhere that it exists. And one place that we've seen this show up is that they have a landing page and they like the layout for that landing page. So then they want to duplicate that landing page. And so they make a clone of it. And this really only clones the structure of it. It doesn't clone the micro content that exists within the page. And so then they go on to this clone version and update the content there, not necessarily realizing that it's also going to be changing the content that exists on the original page, until then they go back later and see, oh no, this is not at all what this page is supposed to be about. And so this is just one piece that they have to sort of switch their mind around. And so this brings me to my last point, which is that the idea of shared content and building pages with flexible layouts does definitely have a learning curve. There we go. So first off, it is a different process than the typical page that they're used to editing, so it can be technically confusing. For most content types, they're used to all of the page content coming from this one edit form. So then they go into this one place, they fill in the fields that are very clear, name, phone number, bio, whatever, and then that spins up into the final page template, and that's what end users see. But with the landing pages, with this flexible layout, they now have two different areas to look at. They have the edit form, which they provide the title for the page, but overall it's mostly just metadata there. And then the layout builder is actually where they go to insert that micro content and the automatic teasers to create the content on the page that the end user is going to see. So this is just something new to be aware of and to think of these two separate places that they need to be working. It also can be strategically tricky. Most of our editors are used to just working in a single vertical column of text. Maybe they put in an image or a block quote, but really it's just filling out this edit form again. And now we're giving them a full page that is completely customizable and has all these different layout options, different color options, decorations. And it's just a lot more to think about, and this can be new and overwhelming. And finally, we are still, of course, supporting our editors to address both of these. We are building out our guidelines and our training to help editors best use the system. And then we also have our support desk, and we welcome open-ended questions through that support desk to, if they just want to come to us and say, I'm not sure the best way to display the content on this page, or can you help me think this through? Then that's something that we can work with them. And we really enjoy doing that type of work. One way that this comes about is also through these hands-on workshops. So this photo is from pre-pandemic, but I really love this type of thing as a chance to step away from the screen and just write out all the pieces of content on these different Post-its. You can rearrange them and prioritize them, figure out how it's going to come together on a page so that you're really thinking of the page from a content first perspective and thinking, what does the user need? How can I make this work best for them? Before then going into the system and having to think about all of the technical difficulties of these the new ways of handling the content. And finally, this is also a learning process for us. So today, right now, is actually the final day of focused research in which we're conducting 15 interviews with editors to better understand how they're using GovHub and what they like, what they don't like, what's working for them, what needs to change. And ultimately, we're treating this as the baseline and the first of many studies like this. We want to know how they are learning the system over time and what is continuing to work for them as we are making updates to the system. We will be publishing some of these results once we get them all figured out and together. That'll be probably in a few weeks. And so if you're interested, you can follow along on Twitter. We are at Georgia.gov team, or subscribe to our newsletter at digitalservices.georgia.gov. And I personally am really excited to see these results and figure out what we can do to better serve our editors and make sure that they're using the system in the best way possible for both them and their end users. So I'm going to pass to Greg to actually show you how this comes together.
Yeah, so I got a little demo that I'm going to do here real quick. This is actually a copy of the Georgia.gov website that I have reskinned as a bookstore site. We use this for doing demos for clients. And so you can see here that I've built this landing page, and it's got some pieces of micro content on it. It's got a service update and an icon list, and some stuff about books and calendars and events and an about us block. And if I go to this layout tab here, you can see we've gotten into the Drupal layout builder. Something that we customized for this was the ability to add colors and background images to the different sections of the layout builder through these drop downs. They provided a library of accent colors and background images that could be used there, which is really cool. One of the great things about this is that, again, because these pieces of micro content are structured and predictable, that means that we can easily modify them for different screen sizes. And you can see this if I drag this into another area, you can see that it automatically adjusts for the different layout that it needs for that area. And you can see this over here too. This would, anybody who is an editor could build this icon list in a WYSIWYG themselves if they wanted to. However, it would become much more difficult for the themers to make it work in different page layouts in different screen sizes, because the ways that one editor might build this icon list would be different from another and from another. And since we made these structured pieces of micro content, now they're predictable. And that means that we can make assumptions about them, which makes theming the site and making it work in these different layout sections a lot easier. Another thing here is that we can, this is fairly standard layout builder stuff for those who are familiar with it, but we can also add different kinds of blocks here. Here we have the different kinds of micro content that are available on the site, automated lists, which are kind of a simplified version of views, a call to action, a code block, a hero, etc. And if we click on one of these, it opens up a fairly standard Drupal edit form. But in addition to, this standard edit form where you can save and insert this into the page, there's also this library which shows all of the previous link collections that have been used. And this is how that shareability aspect comes up, because I could choose any one of the link collections that someone else or that I have created on this site and just insert it into another page. And that is really cool. And as Rachel has pointed out, very, very powerful. No, I'm not going to do that. And then one other thing is that there's some stuff here that is specific to the instance of the block that's been placed and some that are global. So for instance, if I edit this headline, it's global to the block that's been placed. However, there are some appearance-based things that are specific to the instance. So for instance, there's a checkbox here that you can use if you want this block to be displayed in a card. A card gives it this background color and the line across the top. If I remove this, then this will just go blank and it'll just be in a white box. And, in some contexts, that's fine. In this context, it's not as useful. I can't, there it is. Another thing that the Georgia team wanted was this list of icons that you can add. And if you choose one of these icons, then it appears right up here at the top. And so you can also customize a similar block in different places by using different icons. Again, these settings are only for this placement of this block. They're not applied globally. And so that offers another level of customization that they can use, that editors can use for building their pages. But this doesn't just apply for the layout builder pages, it also applies for general content pages. So this is a page that is put together, and it's got an image embedded, but it's also got an upcoming event embedded here. And this is another piece of micro content that's just been dropped into the middle of this WYSIWYG text. This list of books is the same thing. It's just been dropped in here. And this newsletter sign up form is also similar. If we edit this, you'll see that in the WYSIWYG, we kind of have these blocks where these pieces of micro content show up. Originally, we had these rendering in a way that showed them as they were going to be displayed, but we found that site editors got confused about what they could and couldn't edit directly in the WYSIWYG, because these can't be edited directly in the WYSIWYG. But when they were being displayed as proper layouts, people would keep trying to click into the text and edit them. So we replaced them with these gray boxes instead to make that distinction more clear. And these can be added in through custom buttons in the WYSIWYG toolbar, where, for instance, now I can drop in a piece of micro content of the same types that you saw on our layout builder, and the libraries share across the two places too. So I can add a link collection in layout builder and then come to a piece of content over here and add it in there too, the same link collection, the same reusability. And these also have their own custom instance-specific display options. So for instance, for this sign up for our newsletter, it's now floated left. If I say that I want to make it full width, then I can do that and save this. And now you can see that it's full width in the page. Again, another example of what we can do when we have predictable structured elements, and when we've really done the research to understand how site authors want to use the tools that we provide them and what their use cases are, because that was really the key to making all of this work. And that's it for my demo, and that's it for our presentation. We'll be happy to take any Q&A right now if anybody has any.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions added to the Q&A column here. I've tried to go in and answer a couple of them, but I can throw them at you, Greg and Rachel, if you'd like.
I'd like to let in the people in the moderation queue first, if they're still there. Also, because some of them added themselves pretty early. If that's okay. Cool. Toby, I'm going to add you. Still there. And then I guess Antonio, I'll do that too, so they can get ready. Let's see if they join. There's Antonio, Toby, I'm not seeing yet. Sometimes they end up leaving the session, but they're still in the queue. So Antonio, if you want to ask your question. Oh, okay. Never mind, Marissa. You can if they might come back through. You can go right to the Q&A. Just know that the oldest questions are at the bottom, as you've probably already seen.
Yeah, no, thank you for jumping in, and feel free if there are others. I appreciate that. There are a number of questions about the micro content. Kevin asked, are you using Drupal content blocks to house your micro content?
We are not. Our micro content are just nodes, like any other node. We added a couple of pieces of custom configuration to the standard Drupal nodes, where you get a checkbox that says, is this content type a piece of micro content? And if you check that box, then what happens is that content of that type is hidden from the add content screen. It's also hidden from the content admin screen. It gets put into a separate tab. So on a normal content admin screen here, I'll just show this here real quick. You would have just the content page, but now we've got this separate tab for micro content, and that has all of the micro content types in it as well. And then content of those types get rabbit holed. So if you end up going to their URLs, they don't display. They give a 404. And we kind of chose that because we've looked at a lot of different solutions. We've looked at blocks, we've looked at paragraphs, there's a new module called micro content now. And the things that we liked about nodes is that we were very early in the process when we put this together, and nodes work with everything in Drupal. They work out of the box with views. Any custom modules are going to work out of the box with nodes. And we wanted the flexibility to know that if we wanted to go down a path halfway through the project, that it would be well supported by whatever other technology we wanted to bring together. And so using nodes made that work really well.
Someone asked a similar question, asking if it was a paragraph and if we considered paragraphs. So I just wanted to ask, they said, if not, why, if there was anything else you wanted to add related to paragraphs.
No, that was really I kind of covered that, I think, in the other stuff. I will say that if we were coming into a project with a group that had already been heavily invested in paragraphs, like I'm working with a client right now that's already heavily invested in paragraphs. There is a module called Paragraphs Layout, which works similar to Layout Builder, but is more focused on working with paragraphs. And in those situations, I would probably go that route. But if I was starting out of the box, I personally generally prefer working with nodes. And that's especially true if you think that in any possible capacity, your site might be multilingual in the future, because you just get that support so easily out of the box.
Here's a good one. I'm skipping around a little bit to those that have been answered in the questions. In 2021, what would have done differently? I was going to ask if you wanted to elaborate if that is around pandemic situation of 2021 or more in retrospect.
I personally would have, I really like this solution, and I've actually brought it forward to other clients since then. I would not change a lot in what we're doing here at this point. I think that there is a lot of tweaking that has happened between now and then that we would improve, but as far as the greater structure and architecture, I wouldn't change.
I'll answer quickly to say help text. I think if anything, I would just add a lot more help text. The Rachel's example comes to mind of, when you're cloning this, please know that you are not duplicating micro content, etc. Rachel?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of agree with what Greg is saying, that like overall the solution I think is working really well. I think something that we're still working on is figuring out when is it appropriate to have a new type of micro content versus maybe just providing more display options within a single content. I think this is also sort of getting at another question that was coming up, that and like, where do we give the editors control versus controlling that with the system? This is an ongoing question that I'm still trying to figure out. And if we could figure that out, if we were like starting fresh in 2021, that would be fantastic. But I think that's going to be an ongoing question. And also more character limits. I'm just going to add that in there. Always have character limits.
It's a good one. I'm going to jump up so we can get to questions from a couple different people. Did you create custom CK editor library to embed macro content? We talked a little bit about this.
Yeah, so the buttons that appeared at the top in CK Editor were things that we created ourselves. But then the process of once you click on them, getting the pop-up box where you choose what piece of micro content and all of that, that's all largely using the entity embed module in Drupal. So we created the little plugin for CK Editor, but the rest of it was, pretty standard Drupal stuff. I think we did do some customizations to kind of this way that entity embed displays things in those forms, but overall it was pretty straightforward.
Thank you, and that answers the next question. So I'll jump up ahead. Did you end up taking any of this work and contributing back code to Drupal?
This work specifically there's been some stuff we've talked about taking back, but it hasn't happened yet, or maybe it's happened in small patches. I think the biggest thing that we did bring back to Drupal is we redesigned the add content page. So we made it so that you can categorize different kinds of content types and then add extended information for each one. So you could have this icon, you can have a more extended description. You get an automatic link to view existing nodes of this type, and you get this grid list and a longer list where you can see we have the title, a subtitle, and an extended description, as well as these previews of what the page would look like. Because one of the things that we found in our research was that site editors, when choosing a content type, are very keyed into what the content type will look like rather than what it is or what its purpose is. And so all of this has actually been contributed back as a module that's called type tray. And I think it's really great. And I really, this was one of the parts of the project that actually, it didn't fit in with the, the discussion. We had talked about it initially, but cut it for time. But I think it's one of the parts of the site that I was most happy with, and that I think,
And type tray also is something that we have tested since then, and ultimately it's getting great results from our editors. We're continuing to iterate and make some changes on that to make it as easy to use as possible, but ultimately it's tested really well.
Let's see, I'm just going through some of these. It looks like we've answered. Deborah asks, when a user adds a new block, is the content automatically added as a new piece of micro content for use on other pages?
Yep, it is.
Okay, I just wanted to check there wasn't anything else there. Did you customize Layout Builder in any way? That's from Brooke.
We did. I'm not sure how much of this ended up getting rolled back into Layout Builder or not. I talked about how we added the section-specific configuration. So Layout Builder is divided into sections, which is a horizontal row with a layout like this one. This section is 2/3, 1/3. And then sections have regions, and then the regions have blocks. And so this section-specific configuration is something that we added. In addition, when you add a section, when you add a block, we really cleaned up this block filtering mechanism. So this is basically rewritten from scratch. We made it because by default, Drupal lists all of the blocks that are available in the system in one big column. And so what we did was we added the ability to filter which blocks were available. And then we also categorized them. And then we also added some stuff. I think there was a module called content block or something along those lines, which helped us with this, to be able to add, in addition to the micro content types, a preview or teaser of an individual node. So we did a lot of work customizing Layout Builder in this area.
All right, let's see. Vivian asks, how would you handle requests for one-off tweaks to a micro block that can lead to multiple versions of a block? Either of you want to take that one?
Right, that was what I was kind of
Yes.
earlier, is that it's going to have to be case by case, and we'll evaluate, like, is that request something that is actually going to benefit the end users or the organization, or is it just something, I want this to look different in this one spot? And we can respond to that with, well, maybe, but can you use what we already have just for the sake of consistency and the sake of not having too many content types to take care of and maintain over time? So that's always going to be a case by case thing. And when do we spin out a new micro content as opposed to adding a new display option for an existing micro content? That's an ongoing question.
I really love this question. Is the embedded macro content in the micro content in the CK editor ADA compliant, such as reading order? It's a good one.
Rachel, do you know? I actually don't have an answer to that question.
I was looking at you. I believe so, because it all like has an order within the ways that you're going to place it, and so it's just going to go in that order. And so, like, when it's embedded right, then like it will read that first before getting to the content that is to the left of it. But in terms of reading order, I think that should be, yeah, totally compliant.
Mm-hmm. I know we're at a quarter to the hour, so I want to just thank anyone if you need to drop and take a break before the next one. Greg, I was going to jump to one more question. What is the pinball in your space?
This one is Twilight Zone, and then this one back here is Lucky Strike. It's an old electromechanical game that has the old bells and chimes from 1972, I believe. This is my cat, Baby Lion.
I was going to say it does not come with the cat.
Does not come with the cat. That's right.
Do we want to stay on and take some more questions? I don't know if we need to cut the session.
I'm going to go.
We can hang if you want. Sorry, you answer. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say I'm going to go as long as they don't pull the plug on us. So.
You mean go as in keep going?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go for it. Please do.
Okay.
If you have to go and you didn't get a question answered, do post in Slack. But anyway, carry on.
Thank you for that. I knew there might be something to add here. Let's see. I'm trying to go back through some of the repeats. Did you set up certain permissions where only certain users can select micro content on their?
The way that GovHub is architected is it's a Drupal multi-site, and so every agency gets their own website. So by the nature of it, they're automatically set up so that they can't pass micro content from site to site. So we didn't have to set up anything special in permissions. It was just the way that these sites were architected made that happen automatically.
Also, multiple user roles available. So we have, editorial lead is the top tier for what an agency can have. And so then they have access to pretty much everything. And it goes from there down to creator and reviewer who have less permissions. And then certain content types are only available for higher access users when it's something more complicated or involving third-party embeds and things like that. We have that a little bit more locked down.
Deborah asked, how many content types do you have? And I'm just trying to find it. There's over 20. Does anyone know the number offhand?
I think last time I looked, it was like 23 full content types and then 18 or 19 micro content types. And that's in total. There are, I think, 5 or 6 of those are, so the Georgia Bureau of Investigation has a case content type to include information about like unsolved crimes. And so that's very specific to that one website. And we have a few of those for different websites. And then again, with editor roles, some of these are only available to admin access, which is just our team. So we're trying to keep it a little bit limited in terms of what the average editor is going to see, so they aren't just totally overwhelmed with all the options, but they do definitely still have enough that they can get done what they need to.
Were there any questions that you saw that I might have missed that you want to jump in for? Because I know I overlooked a couple for time, so I'm just going back now.
Somebody asked, is there a way, any suggestions on how to customize the block builder in Layout Builder? I know that there's a newer module available to do that wasn't available when we built the system, but I forget what it's called. And I wasn't the developer on the system, so I don't know how they actually did that. But if somebody wants to ping me in Slack, I can put you in touch with the people who are doing that work, and we can, figure out how to get that information out to you.
Allison, did you have one you started to bring up?
I apologize if I missed it because I was trying to copy some things over. Are you saying that you didn't use the embed button module, the entity embed button module for those embed buttons in WYSIWYG, and you built something custom?
I believe so, because the way that we wanted to do it was we wanted to have several embed buttons. We wanted to have one that only listed micro content, one that only listed media types like images and videos, and one that only listed embed a specific node like a bio or a contact or an event or a location or whatever. And so we made custom buttons for each one of those use cases.
I think you can do that with embed button, but maybe that's a newer feature. I'm not sure.
Possibly.
But just something for folks if you're starting something new.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have a follow-up on that. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that.
In the WYSIWYG area, I really loved that solution that you shared with the gray boxes for how the embedded entities are shown. We definitely have run into people thinking that they could edit the text because they can see it right there and whatever. Mm-hmm. So how did you do that? Can you explain that?
I don't know specifically.
Oh, okay.
I know that it was something custom we wrote, and it had something to do with how things get rendered. We interrupted how things get rendered in the WYSIWYG somehow, but I don't know specifically.
And then there's a USWDS question that I'll let you.
I saw one more from earlier I didn't want to miss. Eric, did you implement these new CMS functions as a design system that can be used across organizations? So there was a design system that was overlapping and separate in many ways. I don't know if Rachel, you want to dive into that one anymore.
I wasn't sure. Is this talking about a back-end design system or what we have on the front end of the site?
I assumed a front-end design system.
Okay.
That's what I thought too.
Okay. Yeah, we do have. We call it Orchard, is our design system for all GovHub websites, and we're still working on figuring out how to expand this beyond GovHub. We have a couple of websites that are using pieces of the design system. Like we have the hat, which is just the black bar across the top that says this is an official State of Georgia website, and then the footer across the bottom. And both of those are available as just grab and drop code, I believe. I don't work on the technical side of things a lot, so I might be speaking nonsense a little bit, but we are working on figuring out how to get at least some guidance available for everyone. We're starting with like typography and colors and just basic layout guidelines so that if an agency has a website that's not on GovHub, they can still take advantage of this sort of shared look and feel. And then also for any of their web apps and continue to create a cohesive experience. But that's absolutely a work in progress.
questions because I think there will be, yeah, I'm going to say 2 more questions.
Yeah, that's perfect. And there's 2 more written. Okay, so while all this is a state website, each state does their own thing. As a Rhode Island resident like Marissa, do you have thoughts about design systems like USWDS? Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about this with Georgia when all of the sites were in the sort of archipelago being separate, and then working on a new government project. Everything is under one umbrella, and they're struggling from very different problems. And so I would say for me, I do love the the options that the US web design system offers in its standards, and I've referenced them, but I think really what you're ultimately dealing with in my experience is just so much legacy content and having to adapt to the existing patterns that if something is missing, I think that's a great place, but there's just so much to bring into consistency within a single state and all of its agencies. So I can only imagine doing that for all of the states within the U.S. Rachel, is there anything you want to add to that one? Up to you.
I've got nothing.
Okay. The last question then, for the layout builder sections, did you implement any custom config options? Did you use any layout builder related contrib modules? We talked a little bit about this. You are muted, Greg. We almost got through the whole thing without someone being on mute. Still no. Let me see if I can do it here. No, it's only per person.
No.
Yes, there we go.
All right. We definitely did do some custom config options. I don't know exactly what they are or how they work. Again, if you're curious about that, I can connect people with the people who did that work, because I was the strategist on this project, not the engineer, so I don't really know how that was implemented. We probably did use some contrib modules, but I will say that we did this work in 2019, and at the time, it launched in 2019, which means we're really working on it mostly through 2018. And at the time, Layout Builder was very new. And so a lot of the ecosystem of contributed modules that exist around Layout Builder didn't exist back then. So there's a lot of stuff that we probably did custom that you could probably do with contributed modules now, but at the time, that stuff wasn't necessarily there.
Well, thank you everyone for the amazing questions, and we'll take a look at your Slack thread. Apologies if we weren't able to get to them, but yeah, thanks again for attending.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody have fun.